Mark Twain Selected Works. Extract from Chapter 61 of Roughing It, 1872. One of my comrades there, another of those victims of 18 years of unrequited toil and blighted hopes, was one of the gentlest spirits that ever bore its patient cross in a weary exile. Grave and simple Dick Baker, pocket miner of Dead Horse Gulch. He was 46, gray as a rat, earnest, thoughtful, slenderly educated, slouchily dressed, and clay-soiled. But his heart was finer metal than any gold his shovel ever brought to light, than any indeed that ever was mined or minted. Whenever he was out of luck and a little downhearted, he would fall to mourning over the loss of a wonderful cat he used to own. For where women and children are not, men of kindly impulses take up with pets, for they must love something. And he always spoke of the strange sagacity of that cat with the air of a man who believed in his secret heart that there was something human about it, maybe even supernatural. I heard him talking about this animal once. He said, "Gentlemen, I used to have a cat here by the name of Tom Quartz, which you'd have took an interest in, I reckon. Most anybody would. I had him here 8 years, and he was the remarkablest cat I ever see. He was a large gray one of the Tom species, and he had more heart, natural sense than any man in this camp, and a power of dignity. You wouldn't let the governor of California be familiar with him. He never catched a rat in his life, appeared to be above it. He never cared for nothing but mining. He knowed more about mining, that cat did, than any man I ever see. You couldn't tell him nothing about placer diggings, and as for pocket mining, why, he was just born for it. He would dig out after me and Jim when we went over the hills prospecting, and he would trot along behind us for as much as 5 miles if we went so far. And he had the best judgment about mining ground. Why, you never see anything like it. When we went to work, he'd scatter a glance around, and if he didn't think much of the indications, he would give a look as much as to say, "Well, I have to get you to excuse me." And without another word, he'd heist his nose into the air and shove for home. But if the ground suited him, he would lay low and keep dark till the first pan was washed, and then he would sidle up and take a look, and if there was about 6 or 7 grains of gold, he was satisfied. He didn't want no better prospect than that. And then he would lay down on our coats and snore like a steamboat till we'd struck the pocket, and then get up and superintend. He was nearly lightning on superintending. Well, by and by, up comes this here Quartz excitement. Everybody was into it. Everybody was picking and a-blasting instead of shoveling dirt on the hillside. Everybody was putting down a shaft instead of scraping the surface. Nothing would do Jim but we must tackle the ledges too, and so we did. We commenced putting down a shaft, and Tom Quartz, he began to wonder what in the dickens it was all about. He had never seen any mining like that before, and he was all upset, as you may say. He couldn't come to a right understanding of it no way. It was too many for him. He was down on it, too. You betcha he was down on it powerful, and always appeared to consider it the cussedest foolishness out. But that cat, was always agin newfangled arrangements. Somehow he never could abide 'em. You know how it is with old habits. But by and by Tom Quartz began to get sorter reconciled a little, though he never could altogether understand that eternal sinking of a shaft and never panning out anything. At last he got to coming down in the shaft himself to try to cipher it out. And when he'd get the blues and feel kind of scruffy and aggravated and disgusted, knowing as he did that the bills was running up all the time and we weren't making a cent, he would curl up on a gunny sack in the corner and go to sleep. Well, one day, when the shaft was down about 8 foot, the rock got so hard that we had to put in a blast. The first blasting we'd ever done since Tom Quartz was born. And then we lit the fuse and clumb out and got off about 50 yards, and forgot and left Tom Quartz sound asleep on the gunny sack. In about a minute, we seen a puff of smoke bust up out of the hole, and then everything let go with an awful crash, and about 4 million tons of rock and dirt and smoke and splinters shot up about 1.5 miles into the air, and by George, right in the dead center of it was old Tom Quartz, a-going end over end and a-snorting and a-sneezing and a-clawing and a-reaching for things like all possessed. But it warn't no use, it warn't no use. And that was the last we see of him, for about 2.5 minutes, and then, all of a sudden, it begun to rain rocks and rubbish, and directly he come down ker-whop about 10 feet off from where we stood. Well, I reckon he was perhaps the orneriest looking beast you ever see. One ear was sot back on his neck, and his tail was stove up, and his eye winkers was swinged off, and he was all blacked up with powder and smoke, and all sloppy with mud and slush from one end to the other. Well, sir, it warn't no use to try to apologize. We couldn't say a word. He took a sort of a disgusted look at himself, and then he looked at us, and it was just exactly the same as if he had said, "Gents, maybe you think it's smart to take advantage of a cat that ain't had no experience of quartz mining, but I think different." And then he turned on his heel and marched off home without ever saying another word. That was just his style. And maybe you won't believe it, but after that you never see a cat so prejudiced against quartz mining as what he was. And by, when he did get to going down in the shaft again, you'd have been astonished at his sagacity. The minute we'd tetch off a blast and the fuse would begin to sizzle, he'd give a look as much as to say, "Well, I'll have to get you to excuse me." And it was surprising the way he'd shin out of that hole and go for a tree. Sagacity? It ain't no name for it. 'Twas inspiration. I said, "Well, Mr. Baker, his prejudice against quartz mining was remarkable, considering how he came by it. Couldn't you ever cure him of it?" "Cure him? No. When Tom Quartz was sot once, he was always sot, and you might have blowed him up as much as 3 million times, and you'd never have broken him of his cussed prejudice against quartz mining." The affection and the pride that lit up Baker's face when he delivered this tribute to the firmness of his humble friend of other days will always be a vivid memory with me.